So, as you know, if you could turn mine down just a little bit, Jen. As you know, we've been following the book of Ruth these past few weeks. Ruth is one of the great books of the Bible, of the Old Testament, one of two books that are named after women in the Old Testament. And just to bring you up to speed, Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, were in a difficult spot. They were first century widows. Or I'm sorry, not first century, they were 6th century BC widows. And the 6th century BC was not necessarily very kind to widows in that time. But through God's providence, Ruth had met a man named Boaz, and who was very kind to her. He allowed her to go and glean wheat and barley, to follow the people in his fields who were harvesting the wheat and the barley. And he allowed her to follow along with them and pick up the extras that they missed. And he actually even had his people cut some extra sheaves and leave them aside, especially for her. Boaz had taken a bit of a shine to Ruth, and he was trying to help her along, which is one of the lessons that the book of Ruth has been trying to teach us up till now, which is that God provides special people at certain times in our lives to shepherd us through difficult times. God provides, put those people in our path to help us through difficult times. So Boaz had let Ruth, pick up all these sheaves, and he made sure that she went home with enough to feed her mother-in-law, Naomi. And that pretty much wrapped us up at the end of Ruth chapter 2. But now the harvest season, as we open chapter 3, the harvest season has ended. Harvest, just like today, is 2 or 3 weeks long. Everything is harvested. Everything, goes in the barn and stuff, picked up out of the field. And Ruth and Naomi, as chapter 2 ends, they're kind of back where they started from. They have moved from a foreign land, Moab. They've moved into Bethlehem, which is Naomi's old hometown. But they have no income. They rely on the generosity of others just to eat, right? We don't know exactly where they're staying, but they have no income. And so if they're going to survive, they need a better plan than what they have now, which is what we're about to see as we jump into chapter 3. And there's so much going on in chapter 3, rather than just have me read you a little clip, we're going to do this as an old-fashioned radio play. I guess you'd call it a podcast today, and read through this chapter. So we're going to start with, excuse me. So we have myself in the role of the narrator, because there is a third voice, or an external voice in the text as it's written. And we have Patty as Naomi, the mother-in-law. We have Megan as Ruth. And we have Paul as Boaz over there. And they've all promised to do very well through this. So we're going to start right out, and I will start. The narrator starts, and here we go. This is Ruth and Boaz at the threshing floor is the name of this chapter. One day Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to Ruth,
"My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be provided for. Now Boaz, with those women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know that you're there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do."
I will do whatever you say.
So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law Naomi had told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went to lie down on the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman was lying at his feet.
"Who are you?"
I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family.
The Lord bless you, my dear. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether richer or for poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of my family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, then good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning.
So she lay at his feet until the morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized.
No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. Bring me the shawl you're wearing and hold it out.
When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And then he went back into town.
How did it go, my daughter?
He gave me 6 measures of barley, saying, "Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed."
Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today.
Give our guys a round of
Okay.
applause here. They did a good job. Thank you, guys. We won't make them stay up there until we get to chapter 4, because that's like a whole week from now. So their feet would get pretty tired. Well, you might have noticed dating has changed a little bit since the 6th century BC, right? I mean, today it's flowers and chocolate and going out to a movie and maybe a dinner and a goodnight kiss stolen on the front porch sort of thing, you know. None of that is in play here in Ruth's story. In Ruth's story, it's basically this. If you want a husband, go down to the threshing room floor, uncover his feet in the middle of the night, and you'll get a man that way, right? Which is not what we do. And so seriously, it's kind of disconnected from what we think of today. And it's a little difficult to fathom what's going on. And that makes it hard to build a bridge, because the pastor's job is to build a bridge from what's happening in the past with these people 2,000, in this case, 2,600 years ago, and what's happening in our lives today. So this is a pretty wide bridge we've got to build. But there are some things that we can recognize, right? There are some things that the little markers that are put in the text on the way that we can latch on to figure out what this is like and kind of make connections to for today's world. Well, take, for instance, Naomi's instructions to her daughter-in-law, Ruth, right at the beginning of the text. She says, at the very beginning of the text, Naomi says to Ruth, she says, "Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked," right? She was gleaning in the field, "is a relative of ours. Tonight he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes. And then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking." So a few clues we might be able to pull out of this that kind of line up with dating today, if you will. The first is washing and putting on perfume and getting dressed in your best clothes. That's something we still do today, right? When we want to go on a date, most of us, when we want to go out with someone, we wash up, we take a bath or a shower, we shampoo our hair, we maybe even put on deodorant or perfume, right? Sort of thing. I was in the grocery store the other day and I picked up a tube of Old Spice deodorant for men. Classic. Old Spice Classic, right? Big red tube. And I flipped it around on the back to look at the ingredients and stuff, and it had a little slogan at the top. It says, "Old Spice Classic. If your grandfather hadn't used it, you wouldn't be reading this." And I thought that was pretty clever. I thought truer words were never spoken, right? Right? So some of those traditions that we see here in the text are still applicable to today. They can be tracking all the way back 2,600 years, washing up, getting dressed in good clothes, putting on perfume. The original text said, anoint your face with oil. That's what they used to do. They put a little oil on their face to make it look creamy, smooth, and bright. So we can get that. We can kind of get that. But things start to go off the rails when we get deeper into the text, right? Things get off the rails the further we go into the text. We start losing those connections as we go. Continuing with her instructions, wash, perfume, put on your best clothes. Go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you were there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Threshing floor, uncovering a man's feet, lying down at his feet. Where's all that going, right? Now we're really kind of off the rails. We've lost our connections with today. Well, a threshing floor, to work on that just a little bit, a threshing floor was a place, there was one in every village, only one in every village, right? In most villages anyways, there was just one. So Bethlehem had a threshing floor. And the threshing floor was built on the top of the highest hill in the village. It was made of clay. It was raised up, hard clay, and it was raised up from the ground, above the ground. And what the threshing floor was for was after the harvest, the farmers would take home all these sheaves of wheat and barley, and they would take them home and store them. The harvest was early in the spring, actually. Their growing season is in winter, and their harvest was early in the spring. They would take that stuff home, and then early in the fall, so just to give you a timeline of where we are, it's been several months now since Ruth was out in those fields. Early in the fall, they would take it up, the farmers, one at a time. It was a cooperative thing. They would take their piles of sheaves of wheat and barley up to the threshing floor, and they'd spread it out on the floor, and then they would either beat it with forks or big forks, right? They would either beat it with like pitchforks and stuff, or they would let the oxen trample over it. Some of them even had a kind of a machine arrangement with a roller that they could roll back and forth. And the purpose of that, all that work was to separate the seeds from the sheaves. And then the sheaves they would take and they would throw them away. And what was left was the seeds and the husks. Now, the husks they don't want. You don't want husks with your seeds. When you go to market, you want to buy a bushel of seeds, but not husks. So what they did was they would wait till evening when the wind began to blow. This whole thing was out in the open. Maybe it was covered, but the walls were open. And they would wait till the early evening. You know how the wind starts to blow as the sun starts to go down. And they would take either in great big handfuls or with shovels, and they would throw the seeds up into the air. And the wind would pull the husks off the seeds and blow it away across the woods or across the field. And the heavier seeds would fall to the ground, back onto the threshing room floor. Now you see where, by the way, those husks are also called chaff. You might remember in the Gospels, they talk about when John the Baptist comes and he talks about Jesus coming behind him, the one who sandals he's not worthy to untie. He talks about God coming and separating the chaff from the grain sort of thing, and he's going to burn the chaff. And this is what they meant. They would toss those up in the air, the wind would blow, and the seeds would fall back down. About 10 o'clock at night, the wind would stop blowing. You always did your work from maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon until about 10 o'clock at night. The wind would stop blowing. Wouldn't do you any good if you had more husks to separate to throw into the air. So hopefully by that time the farmer was done, and the next morning he could take all his seeds and take them down to the marketplace to sell. But he couldn't do it yet because you didn't want to travel at night and it's late and you've been working. And so the farmer and his workers would have a great big meal and lots of wine to celebrate, because this was for them, this was a blessing from God, right? A good harvest was a blessing from God. And so to keep the thieves from stealing the grain that night, they would go, the farmer would lay down on top of his pile of grain and sleep there, because nobody's going to steal the grain from you when you're laying on top of it. This is the first documented thing in history of a beanbag chair, right? Really? That's what it is. It's kind of like a beanbag chair. So if you get that history, and we know this from digging up different documents, not just biblical, but other documents and stuff. So if you get that history, all of a sudden verse 7 comes right into focus, right? When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. And because he had eaten and drunk wine, he fell fast asleep, which allowed Ruth to sneak in and walk quietly across the floor. Why? Because she didn't want anybody to know that she was or think that she was a prostitute, a lady of the evening. In fact, if you remember, Ruth told her, put on your cloak so you can kind of hide your figure, sort of thing, and go quietly into the floor. After everybody was sleeping, she walks past all the workers and she goes to Boaz. And she finds Boaz not wanting to wake anyone. And Boaz is all covered up. You know, he's got his little blanket he's pulled over him, which was probably wider than this one, but you understand, right? You work with the props you have. And she took the bottom of the blanket and she folded it up, uncovering his feet. And then she laid crossways at Boaz's feet. Makes chocolate and flour seem pretty dull, doesn't it? Right? Compared to all that. Our traditions are kind of boring and routine. The next time you go on a date, just go and cover your man's feet. See what happens, right? What does all that mean with the uncovering of the feet? Well, historians think that it comes from a Middle Eastern tradition that may predate Ruth by 1,000 years or more. The idea was, by uncovering the man's feet, and then when he wakes up and finds it's cold, and asking him to pull his blanket over you, not for hanky-panky, but as a symbol of his promise to take this woman into your care, right? And so that's how we get this. Who are you? Boaz said. I am your servant, Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer. Some of your Bibles might say, spread your wings over me. The Hebrew word for wings and garment is the same word, actually. So it gets translated different ways. But this is what Ruth is doing. She's hoping that Boaz is going to accept her invitation not to sleep with him for the night for the purposes of pleasure, but instead that he will accept her invitation, he will cover her, and that's a symbol that he will take on her debts, her care, her family, all that stuff. That's what a guardian redeemer or a kinsman redeemer does. You see, all these preparations, the washing, the perfume, the cloak, the sneaking into the night, the uncovering of the feet, all this stuff comes down to one thing. Ruth needs more than just a generous friend. She needs a redeemer. She needs someone who can rescue her life from the path she's been on and give her more than she imagines. So do we, actually. The text behind the text. So do we. So we need, all of us need a redeemer in our life, right? A redeemer is someone who can take us out of a situation that we have no hope of getting out of ourselves, right? I remember as a kid getting off the school bus and walking up the street and watching, stopping at my grandfather's house on the way home because my grandfather had a color TV and ours was black and white, right? We had a nice big color TV, and we'd watch reruns of Gilligan's Island. Gilligan's Island. And I don't have to explain Gilligan's Island, right? You guys all got that. Everyone's seen it. There are no people, studies show there is not a single person on the planet over the age of 5 who has not seen at least one episode of Gilligan's Island. And a plot line that would come up often was that someone from civilization would land on the island accidentally, either by boat or by plane or even one time by a hot air balloon, right? Someone would land on the island, which would raise the promise that the castaways might be rescued. Of course, it never worked out that way because that would end the show, and the writers were making good money at the time. But the need for Gilligan and his companions to have somebody outside who had resources to rescue them, and the need for Ruth and Naomi, who need a kinsman redeemer, are really the same thing. They both needed somebody who could muster the resources to pull them out of their mess. That's what God does, right? That's what Jesus does as well. The Bible is full of stories of redemption from cover to cover. The nation of Israel, one of the biggest stories of redemption that's included as a separate story, the Exodus, right, is a redemption story. The Hebrews are trapped in Egypt. Egypt's got it all over them. They've got guards, they've got weapons, they're making them slave away for 400 years, making monuments and pyramids and who knows what all else, right? And they cry out to God, and God comes and redeems them. He calls them out, sends the plagues, gets them free, parts the Red Sea. God becomes their redeemer. He becomes the one who takes them out of the situation they're in. King David, for you guys reading the Psalms, remember we got that little thing of the Psalms in the back there, you're welcome to take for Lent. King David, all of the Psalms, almost all the Psalms are a call to the Redeemer. Come and help me out. Or celebrating where the Redeemer did. I need your help, Lord. Come and help me. We need to get in out of this situation. I need your help. Come and redeem me, right? Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene, folks who are staying, and I invite you to stay after church downstairs at 11:30. 11:15. We're going to eat. 11:30. We're going to have a episode 1 of The Chosen. It's all warm down there. Big TV, as big as this wall, perhaps. Okay, not quite that big, but a good little small group is going to be after church for the next 8 weeks. Perfect. Love to have you come down. Mary Magdalene, whose life was full of sin and evil spirits and all kinds of stuff, needed a redeemer. God's entire story, right? This entire book, from the moment Eve pulls that salt shaker out of her pocket and salts up that apple and starts chonking down, right? All the way to Jesus, to the thief nailed to the cross next to Jesus, who says, Lord, I need help. Promise me that you'll be in my kingdom. And Jesus says, you will be in my kingdom today. You will see paradise. today. And all the way to the last page of Revelation is all about redemption. It's all about God redeeming his people. And how do we find redemption? I think this chapter 3 of Ruth has a very simple premise behind it. So simple we miss it, because we can almost miss it anyways, because it's got all these traditions and this uncovering of feet and all this culture and stuff layered on top of it. Here's what I think Ruth is saying to us. She's saying, the book of Ruth is saying to us, when you're looking for redemption, start by moving closer to your Redeemer. Right? When you're looking for redemption, start by moving closer to your Redeemer. Behind all the perfume and the threshing floor and the uncovering of feet is this very simple idea. Ruth needs to get close to Boaz. She needs to go find this man so he can redeem her. And amazing things happen when we take even a few steps towards approaching God, seeking redemption, right? Ask Zacchaeus, chapter 19 of the book of Luke. Zacchaeus, remember the little short tax guy who climbs a tree, and he's a tax collector, and he climbs a tree, and he hangs out over a branch as Jesus is going by with the disciples in a kind of a parade going up the streets of Jericho, and Zacchaeus goes to get a look at him, and Jesus says, "Hey, Zacchaeus, come on down." Surprises, I wonder he didn't fall out of the tree and die right there, right? "Hey, Zacchaeus, come on down. We're going to your house for dinner today." And Zacchaeus, he picks up his cell phone, he calls his wife and says, "Clean the house. Jesus is coming." Not really. He gets home and he gets to the door, and before they get to even say anything, Zacchaeus says, "You know what? My whole life, I'm giving all that stuff I've been doing, all the extra I've been charging people, all that stuff, I'm giving it all away so I can follow you." And Jesus says, redemption has come to this house today. Amazing things happen when we take even a few steps to find God. We get redeemed. Why do we need a redeemer? Sometimes it's a situation outside of our control, right? Life has dealt you a steaming pile of oxen poop, and you need something to, life has tossed you to the curb, just as it had for Ruth, right? Ruth's husband had died, and her mother-in-law's husband had died, and life was just dealing her crap, and she needed a way out. Sometimes it's sin. We don't hear that word so much anymore, but it's a very important one. We don't hear that word. The Bible says we can't redeem ourselves from sin. It says the wages of sin are death, right? And you need somebody outside, somebody bigger than us to redeem it from us. There's even our own mortality, not to be morbid, right? But mortality is a hole we can't dig ourselves out of. As far as I know, the rate on life insurance policies is still 100% return, right? No one has ever said, "Gee, I bought this life insurance policy, and look at that, I never used it." You never find a 150-year-old guy or a 150-year-old gal saying, "I never used that life insurance policy. That was a terrible investment." We used to have an insurance salesman that came to our house. He said, old fella, I really liked him. And he said, "Yeah," he said, "I just went to sell this old farmer a life insurance policy." And he was sitting at the kitchen table, and the man said to me, he says, "So you're saying that if I die," and the insurance man said, "If? Really? If?" "Yeah, if. When?" We all run into situations where we cannot dig ourselves out. And that's what a redeemer does. A redeemer does what we cannot do on our own. A redeemer is someone who picks us up, sets us on our feet, heals our wounds, gives us new life. That's where Jesus comes in, right? Ruth needed a kinsman redeemer. A kinsman redeemer was someone from her own family, distant relation, although there might be somebody closer than Boaz. He says that, someone closer than I exists. But somebody from her own family who could buy back the land that Ruth and Elimelech had mortgaged off when they moved to Moab a decade ago, and at the same time take care of her. God provides a kinsman redeemer in Jesus, right? Jesus became one of us, 10 fingers, 10 toes, all that stuff, so that we could join God's family. He became one of our kin so that we could join God's family through adoption. We just have to move towards him and acknowledge the need, and he's there. Paul in Galatians put it really, really well. He said, but when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. How about you? How about you? Have you moved close to Christ so that he can redeem you? I'm figuring probably you already have, right? I know so many of you have committed your heart and your life to the great Redeemer. And if your life is all square with God, then no worries. You came today, you learned what a threshing floor does, right? You learned what to do on your next date when you go out to dinner with your hubby or a friend or whatever. Just uncover their feet and let nature take its course. Right? Great topic for conversation at your next dinner party, right? By the way, you know what a threshing floor is? Let me tell you. Many of you have this, maybe most of you have this all nailed down. But if you haven't, or if it's been so long, right, that the sins have all piled up on top of you again, and that happens too. And I encourage you to pray with me and put yourself in the feet of the one, at the feet of the one who has the power to redeem more than just your land or your name, your internal